So I want to introduce Miko as a focusing oriented therapist and group leader and workshop leader and specializing in movement making. Miko is also part of our focusing millennial group, and any of you that are millennials are um, are invited to come to that group also every other Thursday morning, New York time. And Miko is also part of our community empowerment training program. So, there are many, many more things to say about Miko, but instead, we'll give her a chance to speak for herself. So, welcome, Miko.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lynn, for that introduction. Um, Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with you all again this morning. As Lynn said, my name is Miko. I am living here on Nisenan land, colonially known as Sacramento, California. I experience myself as a Black, queer, agender person of Black womanhood lineage. I don't use gendered pronouns for myself. So you can just call me by my name, Miko, and Miko's in the possessive. As Lynn was saying, I have a background doing social justice and equity work. I'm not a therapist, I'm a hypnotist, and I have a background doing mental health and wellness work, as well as group facilitation work. And I am very excited to share with you all today this follow-up reflection to focusing oriented movement building, part 2. And I do have slides again that I will share with you all that I think makes it easier for me to kind of stay on track and can maybe sometimes be helpful for folks to be able to see some of what I'm saying and sharing in text as well. So yes, this is the follow-up to focusing oriented movement building, and I've adopted the language that Isabel put forward in the last reflection of engaged focusing, similar to engaged Buddhism, where an engaged Buddhist practitioner isn't just engaging in, let me not use engaging again, isn't just doing their Buddhist practice in a way that is kind of, their own individual path, but they're also socially engaged and politically engaged and contributing to positive change in the world in some way as far as political and social change. So engaged focusing then is focusing where one isn't just using the focusing process for their own individual lives or the individual lives of others in that way, but in a more socially and politically engaged way that is working toward our collective carrying forward. So to recap a little bit from last time, this idea of engaged focusing really emerged from, me having this particular background and using the process and experiencing the process of focusing and learning more about Jean Genlin and his philosophy and reading more from him. And in particular, this article, The Political Critique of Awareness, really inspired me to wonder about what focusing looked like when there was this political context applied, because that was something that Jean was really emphasizing in this article, the importance of this political context being brought to focusing with a political consciousness. And so from, engaging in that kind of learning and exploration, there were 3 kind of primary questions that emerged for me that I wanted to further inquire into. So I will share those questions here and then pause for a moment so we can kind of just hold those questions. So the first one being, how might focusing be understood as a liberatory process that can enable a sense of carrying forward even within oppressive contexts? 2, can a focusing orientation facilitate an empowered awareness that supports individuals and social change movements in organizing for our collective carrying forward rather than just our individual carrying forward? And 3rd, how might the wisdom of our inner unfolding and implicit understanding, intentionally accessed through the focusing steps, help us to foster communities and cultures of greater justice, care, and compassion? So I'm just going to pause here for a moment and take a breath before moving forward so that folks have time to really just take those questions in. And so to kind of elaborate more on what is meant by the use of the language empowered awareness that kind of emerged in this questioning here, in this inquiry here, empowered awareness is language that I use to refer to the aspect of self being an awareness from which one is able to act in a generative and life forward direction. So this is language that I use specifically within the context of engaged focusing to refer to that aspect of self that Jean connected with in that research where, clients in therapy were kind of emerging from this felt sense with enough distance to be able to relate to that felt sense and attend to it. So that aspect of ourselves that we shift into that allows that relating and attending, I refer to it as empowered awareness within the context of engaged focusing because of how it is oriented to empowering us to act in some way that ensures our carrying forward or that moves in the direction of our collective carrying forward. So that is the usage of that and what that means. So engaged focusing is about facilitating empowered awareness in such a way that not only liberates the individual within their own mind and embodied self, but empowers them with a sense of power and freedom that persists, even in oppressive conditions, and extends to include the care, empowerment, and liberation of others. And so when someone is operating from this place of empowered awareness, there's this kind of orientation to generative interaction. What is most generative here, right? Where is this life forward process unfolding and how can I intend to promote and facilitate that? And so when that is happening, when there is that generativity, what emerges is greater understanding and clarity. What emerges is healing, care, and liberation. What emerges is transformation and possibility. And this doesn't emerge just as a one-time event. It is this ongoing process and of actualization and emergence. So really understanding that this is a thing that continues in this ongoing way. So, so some of the core questions then, when there is this orientation to generative interaction, is what is it that hinders and facilitates generative interaction at the intrapersonal level within one's individual self, at the interpersonal level within relationship and interaction in that way, and at the community and collective level. So interpersonal level, what is coming up for the individual, where they're not able to fully express themselves. So within an oppressive context, that might be, how is the individual being impacted in such a way by these larger structural patterns, these oppressive or restrictive conditions that are impacting them individually? How are our relationships being shaped by that? And what are these larger systems? How are they impacting things at a community-wide collective level? And that can be seen, for instance, when there's a particular structural pattern that is affecting a group, right? So thinking of sexism, right? So collectively, how that is impacting folks in relation to gender. And so with this engaged focusing orientation, where we are operating from this place of empowered awareness within ourselves, the goal is to really have the intention is to really have this commitment to fostering supportive practices and cultures at all levels that are oriented toward facilitating generative interaction. So I'm just going to pause for a moment there and get a sip of water. So that's kind of a recap of some of the things that emerged in that first reflection. And what I wanted to kind of reflect on with you all today is what might a more tangible application of engaged focusing look like experientially. And so with that, I thought it might be helpful to explore the example of an organization called the Courage of Care Coalition. And so the Courage of Care Coalition is an organization where I'm a faculty member, and it's a nonprofit dedicated to building compassion-based counter-oppressive, healing-centered, transformational, and visionary practice communities where we collectively work to heal and shift toward a more just, generative, and life-affirming way of being. And so this isn't specifically a focusing organization, but it is one in which I recognize that part of my attraction and resonance in that space is that there are a lot of ways that they are doing focusing in practice, but not necessarily in name. So as I do this exploration here of this particular example of Courage of Care Coalition, um, want to really emphasize that just like focusing, how focusing can be used in tandem with various different other healing modalities, engaged focusing can be applied to a variety of different frameworks and examples. And so this is just one of them. So the way that Courage of Care Coalition works to build these practice communities that help to shift us in a more just, generative, and life-affirming way of being is through the use of a relational model or blueprint for building cultures and communities of liberatory practice called Courage Rise. So Courage Rise is the name of this relational model. And I'll break that down here a little bit more. So the Courage Rise framework is a multidimensional framework. It isn't this linear framework where each aspect of this happens, one after the other. It's really a multidimensional one where all of these different pieces are happening at the same time in an ebb and flow way or even simultaneously. So courage, the first aspect or this one aspect of the Courage Rise framework is this grounding in love and lineage. And so even though I've said that this isn't necessarily a linear framework, it's more multidimensional, courage is really like the root of it though. So this is something that is the starting ground. So this grounding in love and lineage. The R in Rise is reveal truths, where we reveal the cause of injustice and oppression. The I in Rise is invest in healing, where we invest in reparative and restorative healing. The S in Rise is sense alternatives, where we sense that new ways of being are possible. And E is embody beloved community, where we embody transformative cultures of practice. So for the remainder of this, I really want to explore with you all, what engaged focusing might look like experientially if applied to this Courage Rise framework for building these communities that contribute to transformative change. So with the courage aspect of this framework, grounding in love and lineage, with engaged focusing, we ground in love and lineage by shifting to that aspect of self where one can access empowered awareness, a state of compassionate presence towards self and others that can lead to a deep sense of connection and interconnectedness with life and all of existence, the entire relational field with which we are in interaction. So this, you can think of this as, when we are starting our focusing practice or our focusing process, usually there's a bit of a coming into our bodies, this attunement that we do. So in some ways, this can kind of be seen as that aspect of engaged focusing and in relation to this framework here. So grounding in love and lineage, and particularly within this political context, with this political context applied, this piece around lineage is recognizing that in this movement building work, in this work of socially engaged and politically engaged work and trying to contribute to transformation, that we are a part of a long lineage of people who have been doing this across time. So when we ground into this place, this place of empowered awareness within ourselves, there's also this recognition that we are grounding into something where we are a part of a larger lineage and that we are connected to and supported by that entire field of care who have also been involved in this work. So looking at R now, reveal truths, revealing the causes of injustice and oppression. So experientially, engaged focusing can lead to greater understanding and clarity. It supports us in sensing into the truth about the structural patterns of society and how we've been shaped by them, and allows us to sense into how those structural patterns are out of alignment with what would be most generative individually and collectively. So thinking, for example, experientially at the individual level, maybe an instance where an individual person is focusing and what they're realizing is that stuck place that they feel, maybe what is emerging in them in that felt sense is some sense of oh, there's this kind of patterning or conditioning that I've had in my experience that says with these particular dimensions of my identity, should be showing up in this way, or with this particular shaping, I need to show up in this society as this way. And actually, that is out of alignment with me. That doesn't resonate with me. There are some needs here that are emerging that are not being met by this current way of being, right? And so this is kind of this experiential feel of this first step, right? This recognition that there is some larger pattern playing out that is present here, and that there's some underlying need that is not being met. So this is that kind of, what is this recognition of this larger pattern, and this experiencing and recognizing of this underlying need that's not being met here. So particularly with engaged focusing, there's this orientation to this awareness of this larger political context that shapes us in this way. So we'll pause here just for a moment. So moving on to the I, the investing in healing, where we invest in reparative and restorative healing. Engaged focusing facilitates healing, care, and liberation by enabling us to move beyond fixed patterns of oppressive and restrictive conditioning toward more life-forward openness and generativity that supports our individual actualization and our ability to be in loving and liberated relationships and community. So kind of thinking again within the experiential context of a person's individual focusing within an engaged focusing context, there's this awareness of these larger patterns and how we may be shaped by them, how we might have internalized them in some way. And, there's this recognition of these needs, right? So that was kind of what was coming with R and the revealed truths. So in the invest in healing, there's a sensing more into what those needs are and then attending to those needs. And specifically also this kind of compassionate attending to those needs. This, I hear you, this acknowledgement of how those felt senses are communicating those needs, what they're communicating, and also this sense of, in response, no wonder you feel that way, right? That kind of compassionate attending there. So this is that moment where we are really kind of just committing to attending to those needs and holding space for that in a compassionate and loving way.
I'm wondering, as we pause, if we could feel just the power of what Miko says about attending to how we're not fitting, our deep selves are not fitting with some structure, and attending to that, and then the liberation of the message of, no wonder you feel that way. No wonder you feel that way. And if we could just take that in, and just a moment of when we've had that experience. All of us have had that experience in some way. Somebody says, oh, no wonder you feel that way, and what that feels like in your body. And how powerful it is to be able to give that to other people, to say that, not only to have it said to you.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you for that, Lynn. Continuing forward there, now to the S and rise as sense alternatives, where we sense that new ways of being are possible. So engaged focusing, as well as a related practice called thinking at the edge, TAE, can support us in moving in the direction of new possibilities, as the focusing process facilitates the unfolding of our implicit understanding and wisdom in a manner that is always newly emergent, evolving, transformative, and adaptive, freeing steps, as Jean Genlin called them. So, as we sense into these needs that are emerging, as we attend to them, as we attend compassionately to them, this is where we then take the opportunity to sense into what are alternative ways of being and relating and interacting that actually meet those needs, right? This is where we begin to sense into what is the way toward fresh air, right? What are the new possibilities? What are those freeing steps that might be able to actually meet the needs that this felt sense is kind of communicating are important to attend to. So that is what where this is what this is at the sense alternatives um, kind of aspect of this larger framework. So pausing here. And again, this is something, each of these components of this framework and how engaged focusing is applied experientially would happen at the individual level, would happen within relationship here, right? So like, okay, we recognize that there are some needs that are emerging in this relationship. And so what are new possibilities for us relating with each other that might allow us to meet those needs? Or even at a societal level, okay, so we are recognizing that there are people in our society who are not having their needs met. There are people who are unhoused. There are people who are not being able to eat, right? And so these very basic things. So what are some alternatives that exist where we may actually be able to meet those needs, right? So that kind of attentiveness and that kind of sensing into new possibilities. And shifting here now into the E of the Courage Rise framework, embody beloved community, where we embody transformative cultures of practice. So engaged focusing is a liberatory process that includes the individual as well as the collective and facilitates ongoing actualization and emergence at all levels of experiencing. It is guided by the intention to continually foster communities and cultures that are evolving in the direction of embodying greater justice, care, and compassion to ensure a generative, carrying forward, and life forward process for all beings in our planet. So this is really this aspect of this multidimensional framework where we sense into, okay, how are we integrating, and committing to one of those possibilities, and not necessarily even just committing to like, this is this fixed thing, but how are we really agreeing to kind of take on one of these possibilities or take on the practicing of these various possibilities in a way where we are embodying them, where we are recognizing that there are these needs that need to be met and that we are actually taking action to meet them in a meaningful way, right? And we are doing that in practice, right? So how are we embodying this intention? So at the individual level, there might be this kind of attending to, okay, how can I commit to attending to what this need here is? What is some meaningful action that it might be important for me to take to carry this forward? Or in relationship, it might be, what are some things that it is important for us to kind of really commit to as our guiding intention going forward that will allow us to move forward in a more generative way? Or in our larger society, what are some shifts that we may need to take in our culture, some practices that we may need to adopt within our larger culture that allow us to meet these needs of our community members to ensure our collective carrying forward, right? So that is an example of what this E of embodying beloved community might be like experientially within this kind of, with this engaged focusing application here. So just taking a moment of pause here for us to hold this together. So we only have there are only a couple more things that I'll share in the reflection, and I'll go slower in sharing that. So I want to also share that one of the core things here, especially as Jean articulated in the political critique of awareness, is this application of this political context to focusing, this political consciousness within focusing. So with that, it is really engaged focusing and applying this political context and working within this political consciousness there's this recognition that it is a process of unlearning and actualizing. So this unlearning of these larger political patterns, these larger societal patterns that we have been shaped by or that we've internalized, that we've been conditioned within, and then actualizing into what our truth is around that, what is true for us, and that what is actually emerging with us around that, how life is expressing itself with us, within us around that. So in that, it is also important when applying engaged focusing or working within this political consciousness to hold this awareness that these structural patterns in our society often operate in such a way where there are certain individuals of group membership who are um, agents within these patterns, or who are kind of in some ways on the receiving end of some sort of benefit. And the other end of that is like target. So folks who are in some ways on the receiving end of some potential harm, right? So an example of this would be folks who have agent group membership in relation to a particular pattern could be in relation to class, right? So people in our society who experience greater wealth or have greater wealth would be viewed as having some level of agent group membership, whereas those who have a lower socioeconomic status would be folks who kind of share this target group membership. And so that is one example of what that dimension or that relationship might look like. And this recognition that there are ways that we all have agent and target group membership dimensions to our identity. And so as we are engaging in this work, there is this kind of holding of this awareness of how we are positioned within these larger patterns that are interacting, that are playing out, how these larger patterns interact with us in our embodiment, specifically in our experiencing. And so in this process here, interpersonally, some of the important questions for us to hold, or the process for us to kind of go through for ourselves, is this process that I'll kind of walk through here. So the first one is kind of attending to, in whatever situation, or when we notice that there's kind of this emerging felt sense within us, this kind of attending, this inquiry and attending. What am I experiencing? Right? That opening, that curiosity, that inquiry and attending. What am I experiencing? What is emerging here? And then shifting into that piece of self-compassion that Lynn was also highlighting, this no wonder I feel that way, and that kind of self-compassionate attending. And then that shift from there that we were kind of talking about, this, what do I need for safety, care, belonging, and generativity? This sensing into the what are the needs here? And then from there, what boundaries and guidance are maybe needed for interaction? Recognizing that there is this larger political context, recognizing that I am positioned in this political context in such a particular way. What is the how that might be needed that would be most generative? So this piece of navigating interaction. And then this fifth piece here is what is emerging authentic to me in my experiencing, or a limited reflection of shaping. So once we've kind of recognized, attended to the felt sense and what's emerging there, once we've identified what those needs are, once we've sensed into what maybe might be most generative, the how, there is then this kind of ongoing attentiveness to whether what is emerging, how this interaction is unfolding, whether or not is authentic, or is a reflection of that larger conditioning still, and this living forward with intention to continue to be authentic as possible, and to support what is most generative at the individual level, interpersonally, and at a collective, larger level as well. So just pausing there for that. So again, this is the final thing that I'll share here. Just kind of in closing, with this reflection, wanted to give a tangible example of how engaged focusing might be able to be applied experientially, and as a process that contributes to transformative change by exploring engaged focusing within the context of this particular framework here of contributing to transformative change. So with that, I'll stop the slide here so we can pause together and so that I can see all of you all here.
Thank you so much, Miko. A lot there. We need that big breath, right? You're giving us a whole sort of framework and way of thinking about things in terms of social systems and our participation in them and how focusing comes to bear on it. And for some of us, it's a new way of thinking of focusing. And you've given us a great big meal. So with this breath, maybe we can see what kindled our imagination here. What stuck out? We can't really take it all in experientially right from the start. How did you identify with it? Jean loved to ask the question in terms of dream interpretation. How is this like your life? And I think that's a wonderful question in general. How is this presentation like our lives?
Thank you, Miko. I really appreciate this presentation. I was here for the first part. It was, it really got me thinking about application. I just want, the first presentation was very theoretical, still very useful. I went and checked the references and very, very helpful. This part two is also it's more applied, but maybe instead of 30,000 foot level, this seems more like a 10,000 foot level. And if you do a part three, I would be interested in hearing more of how these principles play out in a day-to-day way in the organization that you were talking about. How interactions are changed or shifted, or how you implement this, and how is that played out on a ground level within the organization if you decide to do a part three.
Yes, Doug. Thank you. I appreciate that. That interest, and I will share. This is theoretical, and because it is emerging, and this is something that I am exploring and inviting into the organization even more deeply. So there are ways that they engage in focusing in practice, and in some ways, a lot of like sensing into like when we're making decisions or when we're in groups or when we're facilitating workshops or different things like that. There's a sensing into and being with our felt senses and what's emerging from there, speaking from there. And so this is in part kind of this idea of engaged focusing, because I'm wondering, how can we apply this more intentionally to this larger work that we're doing? And so I think in that process, we are living into the experiencing of engaged focusing. So I'll be very excited to live into that with people and to kind of learn collectively together, and to also share with you all and reflect with you all on what emerges from that as we do that in a more kind of practical, tangible way within that community. Thank you.
I'm wondering if there were moments when people felt like, oh, I recognize that from my life. I'm thinking about the moment, um, the moment that, as a young person, my um, my close friend who wanted to be my lover, and I said, "Oh no, women can't, you know, be with each other. That's ridiculous. I need a man." And she came home and shared this song by Alex Dopkin about, I always thought I need a man to love, but something inside came alive. I don't remember the words exactly now, but that was this moment of, oh my God, there's a whole other way, and I want to be with this person. No wonder I feel like I can't. There's a whole structure that's telling me that I can't. It's a moment of, oh wow. Um, and there were other moments in what Miko was saying, like the moment of saying, oh, it's a need that I have. And then my thinking about, but um, also our needs often conflict. I recognize, oh, I feel this way because I have a need for safety, and safety means this to me, but safety means that to you. What now? And then, how can focusing help us to find that place where we can, um, communicate there? So I just wondered if the rest of you had these little moments where you said, "Oh, it's like that." And I also, Miko, wished, and I don't know if this is possible, but I wish that you would give us a presentation using yourself as an example
Mhm.
of all of the things in your,
Yeah,
you know, uh,
yeah.
and that would enable us to make that crossing from
Mhm.
theory. We're trying to make a bridge here between this um, fabulous theory that Miko was developing to lived experience, and that's what
Mhm.
Doug was talking about.
Right. And I'm thinking too of, the example of Harriet Tubman last time, right? So thinking of the life of Harriet Tubman, this person who recognizes, oh, actually, I've been born into this system of slavery. And so I've been shaped by that. But actually, no, this isn't what I want for myself. There's a need here for me to be free. And so investing in like actually attending to that and recognizing that she has the option to escape and to leave, and then actually doing that. And that she did it in such a way where she also then did that for other people, right? And collectively bringing folks of people to their liberation through this process of, hey, this is the larger reality. There's this larger system of slavery. There's a truth that we actually deserve to be free. Like, let's honor that. There's this alternative. We can go to freedom, and then actually doing that and embodying that reality in such a way that then leads to our collective carrying forward, where now, many hundreds of years later, we have a different society where that system of slavery isn't present in that same way. So that's just kind of, you can even look historically, what are some of these examples within social change movements where we've seen this trajectory over time? What are some of these examples in the individual lives of community activists and people who've contributed to change in that way? And so I think another interest I have is reading like the autobiography of different figures in their lives and seeing, is this emerging for them? Has this been a path that was present for them in their lives? Or even in your own experience of focusing, are there ways that you can sense into different aspects of what we've talked about kind of emerging there.
Thank you, Miko. That was a beautiful, yes. And Harriet Tubman can also be taken metaphorically. You know, those moments when we all recognize that that we were born into some kind of slavery in certain ways, slavery of thinking in ways that we're bound to and we need to transcend, and that we can be free, and then we can help other people be free. But that whole notion of focusing as a liberatory process, it carries forward and it makes us free. It's amazing to think about that. I mean, we think so much in psychotherapy, and I knew that you were a hypnotist, and I thought that you were also a therapist, Miko. So I'm sorry for that, introducing you incorrectly there. But those of us who are psychotherapists, to think of healing, helping people to heal, but also helping people to be free, and that freedom is a healing. Healing and freedom have to go together.
I see that Jonathan's hand is raised, as well as Banu.
Thank you. One thing I'm, it's funny, I'm responding to one of what you said, Lynn. It's like, what's the application that you've noticed in your life? And I guess from hearing your presentation, Miko, it's like, oh, I kind of stop at the step where I notice some kind of like cognitive dissonance, like when my value doesn't meet what's happening, whether I'm the agent in that scenario or I'm watching some other agent. And then I think I might go to like well, I don't know, this is a much bigger problem. And then I stop. There isn't a pause there for me to sense what wants to come from, if I let the implying further, if I just let myself pause here. And that's what I'm getting from your presentation. Like, okay, I can, instead of going to this I don't know space and then closing, I can kind of stay open in that pause and see what wants to come, which is already kind of a step of empowerment from the step of helpless, like, I don't know. So thank you.
I love what you said there, Jonathan. I just want to reflect that a minute, that so often we say, oh, it's a much bigger problem. It's a social political problem. It's a big problem. Okay, let me not go there. And it stops us. And Miko's theory is saying, oh no, focusing could help us not to be stopped there, but to go inside and say, oh, it's a bigger problem. What is that? What can that be? What do we need there? All those wonderful focusing questions that could help us not be stopped. And I love what you're saying, Jonathan, because it feels to me like, at least in my small peer circles, so many of my peers get sort of stopped at the social political level somewhere of communication and say, oh, that's a bigger problem. It's the them problem. They do this and they're doing that, and stop. And that's very inspiring.
Hearing your reflection, Lynn, I'm present, like, yes, like a lot of, all of these things are large systemic, like architectural societal problems. And yet if I look at something like any ism requires a human to ism. and I am a human, it's like it comes from me. It's not this arbitrary. I mean, it can also be viewed in the frame of like it's some big thing out there, but it also comes from me.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, mhm. And I think from that, that's where this sense of these communities of practice, right, come from. That in this, we can build, kind of bring together these collective me's who are operating in this way, who can then kind of shift these larger systems. So yeah, I appreciate both of your reflections.
There's Banu having her hand up for some time. So,
Oh, hi. Yeah. Let me put it down. I have a few thoughts, and when Jonathan spoke, that also inspired me a bit more. One thing that got my attention, Lynn, in your story, and also, of course, in Miko's, including Harriet Tubman and in communities, there is something about each other that we touch each other in certain ways. We awaken in each other possibilities. That seems to be really crucial in what we're talking about. And in focusing, we do talk about the, interpersonal a bit, but this sort of as a necessary perspective, it seems, because existentially we are touched by others who awaken us, as I said. And I don't know that I have anything more profound to say, but it really struck me. And another thought I had was, yeah, of course. I mean, this is so welcome because, I mean, personally, all the time, I mean, I was in academia and we learn all these theories and there's something about it. And now we have a lot of thinking happening in the more public arena that is more shared than it used to be, maybe. Rather than intellectuals, everybody is trying to think and create new ways of understanding each other, and with the millennials and the Z generation, whatever. And there is something a lot of times when these theories come to us, they tend to sort of define us, right? And so, is this what I do? Is this what I do? And focusing gives us a sense of what does it actually mean to be here? And the same with ideology, just that sense of like, here I am, how is it sitting with me? What does it mean for me? Does it feel okay? Does this word feel okay? Does this way of being feel okay? And if it doesn't, does it mean I have to reject it? Or do I come up with a new way of being with it? So focusing basically tells you, hey, it doesn't have to be a yes or no. Let's kind of just hang in there. And I think that's what's so precious about it. And relatedly, it's actually funny you said that. Like, Miko, I wanted to be in touch. You've been in my to-do list for a while to get in touch with. But when I was getting my PhD, I'd written like a little paper as focusing as a liberatory practice. And an emergent liberatory practice, because it is about the bottom up, and that's what's so precious. And we don't have a sense socially of understanding the bottom up that's widely shared. And one thing that I remember, there was a conversation that went on in the focusing listserv a few years ago, maybe now, of can you use focusing for evil? Like, is it inherently good? And I don't know what the result was, but I think it was pointing to the fact, which was a conversation I actually had with Gene when he was alive and well, of there is something about focusing that it's really process oriented. It's about how it happens, and it doesn't necessarily tell you what to think and how to be. And we do bring our values, and there's something that it needs. And Gene would say, always cross it with something else. If I'm sure a lot of you remember, especially in the last few years, was like never use focusing alone. So it seems that there's you bringing your values, but also sort of running them through or crossing it with, the wisdom of focusing. And it seems to be basically the only way we can move forward right now, of not just coming up with new categories and new ways and new rules, but more as, yes, we have them. Yes, we have our values, but also they're constantly changing and they're constantly turning into something else, which they're going to have to be. And that's why a lot of us feel sort of confused. So this was okay last year, and this is what happened last year. And now I have this new word, and now I have this new way of being. And it seems to be the state of the world, and it needs to be that way. And sorry, I droned on a little bit, but I'm almost done. It just feels like this is the kind of crossing that needs to happen. So yeah, we do bring our values and what feels right to us in a very deep sense, maybe even past focusing in a way that we understand focusing, although I don't think it's necessarily past it, but it's like a very core sense, but being able to bring it into life and do it in a way that's less oppressive. And I don't know that you can fully get away from any form of oppression, hopefully. But so that's why I'm really, really excited about hearing this. And of course, it applies in my life. And in many ways, I just remembered when you talked about this, that when I was dancing at a party and I noticed how much I was, at one point, I just had this weird experience of like, oh, I'm actually trying really hard to be normal. I'm trying hard not to dance in a weird way. And I noticed the oppression of just even being normal, right? Like we live with this, and even in these smaller ways. Of course, the political and the socioeconomic categories are there. So it's really exciting. Thank you for doing the work. And of course, thank you, Lynn, for persisting and bringing Miko to us. And
Thank you, Danu. And let's just spontaneously share anything that we want to.
My group, we came to understanding that we really need to find out how Miko came to get this very strong academic understanding, how personally she got into it. That would make a big difference in terms of listening to the 2 lectures so far. And I use the term lectures very advisedly because it's from an academic point of view, as I said, I'd give her an A+. From a personal point of view, I find it very difficult to relate to the subject, not only because of the pacing and the timing. You really need like 2 more sessions to really get into what she's saying. And to really experience it for ourselves rather than just being lectured. So therefore, but I'm more curious, in order for me to really put my own sense of who I am into it, I need some sense of how she got to this.
And is that a question or something for the future? I mean, would you want
Both.
because that's a big subject. But Miko, maybe you could say a couple of words about it now, and we'll have a part 3 with answering that more.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Trevor. How I got into it. I think a couple of things are emerging in response to your reflection. I won't take up too much time. I think, in our small group, well, one of the things we were reflecting on is how this Help for Helpers group is already a practice community of sorts, right? And so this kind of process of engaged focusing is playing out within this space. So the experiencing of it is kind of a more like retroactive kind of reflecting on how has this been present and what we've been going through together here in this space. So that's kind of one of the things that we were exploring there, or that I was kind of reflecting on there in that group. And I think how I got into it, I think just that's a very, I think just like doing the work of recognizing that I'm working with various different groups of people or working in various different communities where there is some sort of injustice that they're dealing with, whether it is access to food, whether it is access to housing, whether it is targeted violence, right? And how they still maintain their resilience, how they still survive, and how, not just how they survive, but how they go on to thrive, and how we go on to create societies in a world where they actually have greater liberation, right? So I think, I think that has been part of that experiencing. And even for myself as a person who is embodied in the way that I am, growing up a Black girl, and the experiences I had in Montgomery, Alabama, kind of these different interactions, and how I came to have an understanding of myself that went beyond the stories that were out there that I was being told about what it meant that I was a Black girl, right? To being like, actually, this is what I need. This is what's true for me. Let me heal the parts of myself where it said, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're this, you're that, right? The healing that I did, and that a lot of it through focusing in meaningful ways and sensing new possibilities for me to show up in ways that affirm what those needs are, and then fully embodying it in my daily life and in my everyday, and really attending to continually in my interaction, am I feeling this way, or am I showing up this way because it's part of this internalized way of being that, oh, this is what it means and how you should show up because you are this particular person, or is this actually authentic to me and what I want and what I need? So that's kind of a brief example without me taking up too much space, but I appreciate your reflection, Trevor, and the importance of it being experiential for everyone. So there's that understanding.
The next question then is maybe what you need to do is to do a case study, without necessarily identifying people for their own private purposes. But that's really the next step in terms of now you've described the theory and how it relates to focusing and thinking at the edge, but doing it in a concrete way would really help us then to extrapolate into our own sense of how it fits together.
Yeah.
Believe me, I'm exploring it in this area. It's very helpful to me personally.
Yeah, these case studies and concrete examples. And I think, I'm receiving that and looking, I think, at like historical figures, movements, and then, how can we practice this in community and have that case study emerge? Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I love the connection between the inner experience, and the outer commitment to joining together with other people, working for social justice. And, I love the connection that you made, and that was clear to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayana. And I see Bridget's hand is raised.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. In my group, one person got back into the politically engaged, and that's the juicy part for me. Is like engaged Buddhism. How can we be Buddhist and without being engaged? And I feel that if we are fooling ourselves if we think that they are part of our lives, that we are not political. Everything is political. Our chain, everything we say, we do, we buy. And I am thrilled that the word political is there. It's not a dirty word. It's not a divisive word. It's a very powerful word that says that we have responsibility. I think we have to redefine what is political. It's my responsibility to how I talk, what I buy, well, what I study, because it has impact on everything, not only on me, but also on the future generations on the planet. So go girl.
Yes, I appreciate that. Political and responsibility. So important. So important.
Yeah. Can I say something? My name is Shashi. Am I correct in saying that if we look at this thing that privilege and oppression are a continuum and are a continuum from one end to the other, and we are so much embedded in the context that we are facing both at any given time. And the more we become aware of each ends of that continuum, the more empowered we are to change. And that's how the change starts, that, all of us are having both of these. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's for the empowerment of everyone, regardless of where you're positioned within that system. And especially, it's important, not just like a regardless, but like really in each all along the continuum, that empowerment is so essential to our collective carrying forward.
But we are so embedded in the context that we are unaware of all these subtle nuances. And part of our job is to become aware of those nuances at both ends to move forward.
Yes, those nuances and the sense I get, and why, particularly why this is so important, is because I think focusing can really support us in attending to those nuances in a way where we can kind of move forward with each other and not lose each other because we're not able to kind of also hold those nuances and that complexity as well. Yes, thank you.
Yes, maybe that is a wonderful, these comments are wonderful comments to end our group today. And Dorothy is going to give us a poem to end by. And thank you for these comments. And thank you, Miko.
Hi, thank you so much, Miko. Really triggered so much thinking. And Miko offered this poem, and I think it really reflects a lot of what Miko is about. The poet, Adrienne Marie Brown, she's an American author, doula, women's rights activist, and Black feminist, now based in Detroit. And Miko wanted to point out two books that she's written recently. One is called We Will Not Cancel Us, and another, Holding Change. And they both explore possibilities of facilitating transformation and change in our communities. I'll write those in the chat too. Making tomorrow, the small place between yesterday and tomorrow, where people who can see futures whisper to each other the words to the songs they must sing to lead the way. The narrow corridor creaks with every step. People think they can run the path like bulls, but the only way forward is at the pace of our collective heartbeat, all together, imperfect together. The past is turning to dust behind us. We must remember the future is waiting beyond our anxiety. We must dream. The present is so small. We must fill it with our transformation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dorothy. And everybody, and we will see you next week. And everybody can say goodbye together, and hopefully we'll have a good week this week.
Merci beaucoup.
Bye.
Thank you, Miko.
Bye.
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 Thank you, Miko.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miko. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Lynn.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
I think we lost.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.